This episode was sponsored by Slate Black Industries. For grips and accessories, visit slateblackindustries.com.
No! That was a genuine H&K 93 SG1, and yikes. The original Coca-Cola. And the original Heckler & Koch HK91. This one is of the year 1981 with code IB. It was a rifle that was banned in the assault weapons ban. So you can't get it. Well, you can, but at a cost. So what's a great value alternative to this, as there are great value alternatives to this? Ladies and gentlemen, that would be PTR. This is the PTR 91. It duplicates a lot of the function of the HK91/G3. Is it good? That, my dear friends, is up for debate. At one point, I would have said absolutely. I've had excellent experiences with the PTR 91. But as of lately, I cannot say the same. But let's look at how PTR actually came about, though. The HK91, of course, was banned during the assault weapon ban, and that's why H&K couldn't bring any more of them in. Yes, there were SR9s coming in, but there's few and far between. So there was a value proposition right here that a company capitalized on. A company called JLD Enterprises. Jose Luis Diaz, out of Connecticut. Now, they made a line of rifles called the PTR 91, the Precision Target Rifle 91. Not what we would call the Poor Trash Rifle 91. No. These were called the Precision Target Rifle 91s. Of course, Precision Target Rifle for its purpose, and 91 in echo of the HK91 style of design. And these were fairly good copies of it because they used FMP tooling to manufacture the receiver, and then they used a lot of surplus components to put together. This was a time of the parts kits because a lot of those rifles, the pre-bans, were no longer coming in the country. And a lot of these used either H&K surplus components or FMP or military surplus components. So the internal guts were good, and also the trigger pack was good. And the barrels that they used were Wilson or Thompson, top tier. So you got a very, very well-functioning semi-auto rifle with cheap magazines, with a very high-quality barrel for a fraction of the price of the HK91s. And that itself was a value proposition that drove business for JLD. Now, subsequently, JLD sold the company in 2005 to another company. The company formed to take over as PTR Inc., the PTR series of rifles. And this continued okay, not bad. They had started at this point to manufacture some internal components. Now, this is understandable because you cannot build a company that habitually uses surplus components because that's going to run out. You want to have some kind of component manufacturing. And they started off with the trunnions, and the trunnions initially were soft, but they solved that problem. Once they did, though, they started integrating the paddle mag release that was actually absent on the HK91. Yes, my HK91 has a paddle mag release because I had my friend Mike at 19 Charlie install it. That was awesome. But that was a major function to restore the G3 manual of arms to these rifles. So at this point, not only was it functioning like an actual G3, it was actually giving features back to the rifle for it to function like an actual G3 and not like the civilian ban era HK91. So the value you could see for the PTR continued to rise. Later on, interesting enough, not the PTR 91, but the PTR 9s that I ended up with one of the early manufacturers of the PTR 9 was an MP5 clone. And during this era, the MP5s were fairly expensive. So at 1/3 the cost of an MP5, I was able to get a very well-functioning MP5 clone from PTR. So the company itself had built its reputation on this value that they were presenting people for the HK-type performance without any of the troubles of special weapons or any of those bad clones out there. And they were doing well. But then at some point you started seeing them slip. It first came about when they started switching out pistol grips. They started using these cheesy, I don't know what pistol grips. They looked like Navy type grips, but the selectors were way off. And then they started using these really nasty looking handguards. And the entire internals, the trigger is cast and no longer stamped like the original ones. The hammer is mimmed. There's good mim and bad mim, to be fair. H&K does mim some of their internal parts, but the PTR components had bubbles mimmed inside of them, and they would crack and just self-destruct inside of the rifle. And then they also used not the surplus type of trigger pack, but they started using an aluminum machine trigger pack. All of that aside, they also had functionality issues. They would have jams. This one also has a crooked front sight. G3K clone. You can see how the front sight is completely off center. That is just horrible quality work. And this one also came with the incorrect locking piece inside. Now the locking piece is important because when you fire it, the locking piece controls how fast your carrier runs, which means in gas-operated rifle terms, you could overgas or undergas the rifle. Now, I've changed this to the correct G3K locking piece. It still doesn't run right. So they started slipping on the perceived value of the PTR because when you start putting so many components onto the rifle that people are going to switch out immediately because they want this, that cost starts going up. And then they started increasing the price that they would charge for these rifles. And I ended up, between this and this is probably costing double what I would have paid for this back in the 20-teens. PTR has seemingly unable to read the market and the value proposition that they built the reputation on with the JLD days and the early PTR days. And they've come out with abominations like this that just don't work. Or it takes that value, the value proposition away from even buying one of these things. And in the meantime, other rifles, their costs came down. The AR-10 costs came down. And so we come to later days of PTR. I don't know what's going on in the organization. They come up with rifles like the PTR 9 LTR, which is a 9mm, it's an MP5 back end with an HK33K type front end. It's a configuration that absolutely nobody asked for, and yet they made it. They came out with a PTR 63, which I understand they're going for the G41 clone, but they were able to make a G41 clone that would piss everybody off, because it's not a complete G41 clone. It still uses the front side of an HK33, but then the problem is it does use Stanag mags. The trigger components and the fire control group is completely different from the HK33s, and the stock is non-compatible with any HK33 stuff. I understand where they're coming from. They're trying to make a rifle to hit the market that would satisfy what people want without getting sued by H&K, which is rich, because they would
send friendly letters to other companies to inquire about their suppressor designs and say hello.
And so you end up with a company that started its journey on creating a value proposition that Americans simply could not say no to. A well-functioning, semi-auto HK91 clone that was pretty accurate and did very, very well in parallel to the actual G3s. You started stripping away the surplus components which people wanted. You started stripping away the reliability that people were looking for. You even started stripping away components that made it look cool. And then, at the end stage, you started making abominations that absolutely nobody was looking for. The value's gone out. The clonability's gone out. Where are we now? I hope this video serves as something for people in the manufacturing world to understand that we still have to look at the market of whom we supply. If you are not able to read the demand and you are making a supply that is not fitting the demand, you are going to run into problems. At the very least, I hope they start making rifles without crappy components and with locking pieces that fit their configuration. Is that too much to ask?
Okay, part of this I need to be a little bit more fair on PTR because they do still sell the GI line of the 7.62 G3-ish rifle, which does, let's say, it features stock set and metal lower, packs are military surplus rated NRA good. So it does appear that the stock, the trigger packs are surplus, like what I said would be better. However, I do know that their barrels and trunnions are significantly softer than the military ones. I asked my gunsmith Mike to also contribute to the very nerdy teardown stuff that we're about to show. So look at it, not only from my perspective, but also from Mike's perspective, a gunsmith who works on these things on a regular basis and has a sample, a more technical sample of commercial roller delays that he has to work to fix all the time. Also, make fun of Mike because he and his assistant decided to film his portion vertically rather than landscape like the TikTok generation we live in. So we'll see you there at the nerdy teardown. Okay, so right here we have the original HK pistol grip. We have the PTR, early PTR 91 type pistol grip, and the current offering of the PTR 91 pistol grip. I wanted you to look at the construction of the housing on the PTR 91 and the HK, the early PTR 91 and the actual HK. Of course, we can see that the housings are almost the same. This is a semi-only. This one is converted from a full auto housing. And if you look, they did a decent job clipping the housing to make it resemble the civilian HK91 housing. Now, putting this aside, we can see the internals are very similar. Because of course this one is likely converted from a full auto pack from a parts kit. So you can see the HK version right here has welded a shelf, whereas the PTR 91 has not. The ejectors seem very similar, but you'll see that the PTR, this version, already uses a PTR hammer. Now this is the component that started to show issues that were the PTR manufactured components, but what can you do? Sometimes you need to start making your own stuff. Now, this is what it currently offers. The selector, you can see, does not quite look like the H&K one. HK for this one. PTR when it was good, PTR when it's bad. If you pull the trigger pack out, First of all, you can already see that they changed from the stamped housing to a billeted housing that uses screws to fasten it instead of it being stamped and welded. And then also the internal components, it went from a stamped trigger to a cast trigger. And also, it's got the PTR replacement components. This is just not very good, and it's not to the military type of specifications that you would want. The hammer is the main concern right here, because a hammer does crack on the PTR 91s. Not all of them, but some of them were poorly manufactured, unfortunately.
Customer brought in a Setney C parts kit with a PTR barrel for full build, and the supplied PTR barrel is extremely soft. This is the Setney trunnion. These are very hard, and the galling you see here, just made out of soft metal. This was installed once, and it just didn't fit. There's some aluminum anti-seize in here. Around here, it galled to the point that it doesn't fit anymore. Well, I could almost push that all the way through. The fix for that was an RCM trunnion, barrel, and bolt. So when building roller locks, the heart of the system is the barrel, bolt, and trunnions. They should all be made by the same company or under very strict quality standards, because if you have one that's too soft and one over hard, this happens. This happens a lot on AKs. Some galling on an AK full barrel. Just a little bit there. But galling is the forceful removal of metal, which you don't want. This is the PTR barrel. A little galling when removing it. This was, like I said, purchased in 2012. Bad galling. Now, that's acceptable for removal. This barrel could be reused, and the way we would do that is rotate it so we get a new barrel pin slot and then install a new front sight. I'll also note here that this pockmark is likely the hardness test. So this has actually been QC'd. This, I don't know, maybe. While I have this, the thread pitch is 5/8 24 on this, whereas the original is metric M15 by 1. I don't know if you want to make the new US made flash hiders look like the old ones. I get why you make them in 5/8 24 to utilize US made stuff. The replacement barrel was an M61 original G3-ish profile, which is the same as the Setney Model C. So where is PTR going with this? Well, they're kind of going towards the special weapons route with shitty parts.
Okay, as we look at the receiver, this is the original H&K. You'll see that the original ones, the HK91s, had a denial bar on the sight on the claw mount shoe. The PTR 91s, the earlier ones, it actually used the military type of rear sight, which you could still get the military type rear sights, but this is an optic rail that Mike had added on to me. Side note, these don't usually come with the paddle. Mike added this paddle for me. Later on, you ended up with this, which you look, it denied the entire claw mount shoe and it forces you to only use the optic. Now, this is problematic, less so on something like this, but I've seen on the PTR CA3, which is a project that PTR worked with Sentry on, has no top rail, and it uses this style of sight. I understand using stocking the same components to lessen your cost of builds, but man, no top rail and only this sight that could not use the claw mount, that's brutally restricting the CA3 type rifle, which is the FMP parts kit remanufactured into a Century receiver for Century. That's restricting that particular rifle to only use iron sights and no optics whatsoever. That's not great. Finally, if you look at this, you'll see that earlier PTR, some of their surplus handguards, this one's actually HK coated, are surplus, and that's quite nice. However, we now come up with this style of ugly M-LOK handguard. A handguard that most people just take and throw away. They'll try to buy something that could substitute it. Again, more money spent that you don't have to spend. The H&Ks, of course, have the good, the wide handguard. Now the bolt carrier group, I haven't dumped enough rounds into it to really say whether it's good or bad, but you can see this is off of the H&K, genuinely H&K marked, and I brought another one from an FMP parts kit, and you'll see that the mil spec ones have this style of rounder hole, and the welds look fairly similar on the H&K and the Portuguese FMP G3. Now again, understand these two are, FMP is a licensed manufacturer of the H&K, so it should be all intents and purposes the same. Now this is the midlife PTR, and this is the late PTR. I haven't necessarily run into issues with the actual operation of the bolt carrier group. However, earlier when the PTR K3P went back to PTR, it went back because it wouldn't cycle and they had to change the locking piece and the bolt, which unfortunately and annoyingly, the locking piece that they put back in here was also the incorrect locking piece, and it still wouldn't work when it came back to me. Now, you can see PTR started making their bolt heads right here. And I believe these are definitely not RCM. So RCM makes their own stuff as well. One thing though, if you look at the G3, these are full auto, and this is a semi-auto carrier, which the early PTR had semi-auto carriers, and later PTRs, that is the auto sear trip, which is the auto carrier. So they do come with automatic carriers nowadays. Whether that's good or bad, it's up to you. So let's look at the stocks. This is the HK91 stock. This is the earlier PTR 91 style stock. And this is the later PTR 91 style stock. Now this one's been heavily modified. As you can see, I modified this to take an SG1 comb. That said, my complaints are actually not here. The stocks are actually okay. I think it is interesting, however, how PTR, later PTRs, you can see this is a crossed out military rack number that is very common with Portuguese kits. So I'm wondering if they're having trouble manufacturing the end cap. But again, the stock is not my main concern. You can see the HK codes are typically right here. And the PTR 91 lacks the manufacturing code.
So, here's a PTR. A mid-grade, as Henry would call it, or mid-production. Zoom in. It has the Scorpion target, and a Scorpion target here. PTR Inc. On my personal one, it says JLD Enterprises, so it's a very early one. This also has a heavy barrel. PTR at some point changed to heavy barrels. I don't know when in their production, but this is also an M15 flash hider. So they can do it. This is a customer gun that came in to get the paddle mag release installed. brass deflector, and top rail. And I'll show a couple of the internal parts. Stamp trigger, very good. It's a JLD marked hammer. You see that? There we go. This doesn't look MIM. I'm not a MIM expert. Yes, there's good MIM and bad MIM. This looks like it has some machine marks on it, which that's fine. It's a good it's an HK ejector, so that's good. JLD marked cocking handle. So this actually looks pretty good. Ah, chef's kiss. And I get not being able to use surplus parts forever. You have to make some stuff in-house. Use the correct materials and the correct processes. Hardness testing, good. Bad.
So at the time of filming this, these Portuguese parts kits are fairly easily obtained for a very low cost, because of course Portugal had just released a lot of these into the surplus market. Mil-spec trunnion, mil-spec bolt carrier group. I don't have it here, but the trigger pack is also, of course, these were military rifles, so they were made to H&K spec. You'll see the rear sight has the claw mount shoe. Everything is here. The value proposition, in my opinion, has shifted away from the PTR when they put their price point at so high, and these things are so available. I think a lot of AK gunsmiths are currently retooling to work on these things. So the question is, why? Why would you ever go for the PTR?
Well, why you do it then, baby Billy? Well, cause I'm selfless.
The original barrels are even coming into country. So again, why?
716 is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 1 Steel 91,